Right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Wanted to welcome you and thank you again for participating in the second workshop for the proposed amendments to District Rules 2201, the new and modified stationary source review rule, and District Rule 2301, our emission reduction credit banking rule. My name is Errol Villegas. I am a permit services manager here in the Central Region Fresno office. To my left, I have Brian Clerico, who is a supervising air quality engineer. And to his left is Jesse Garcia, one of our senior air quality engineers. This meeting is going to be held via Zoom teleconference and is being recorded. We will definitely do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting. But before we begin, I wanted to review some general information and housekeeping instructions for the meeting. First off, for those in attendance, please silence your other communication devices, such as your mobile or desk phone. This will ensure that we're not hearing any feedback that can interrupt the meeting. We'll also open up the meeting at various points throughout the presentation and at the end for public comments and questions. However, if you do have any questions at any point in the presentation, please make yourself known and we'll try to identify you and answer your questions. For members that are participating via the Zoom application, please, when you have a question, raise your hand or press the raise hand button so that you may be recognized to speak. For those participating via teleconference, please press *9 to raise your hand and be recognized. Staff will then call out the last 4 digits of your phone number to identify when it's your turn to speak, and then please be sure to press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. We will also have an opportunity to receive comments electronically, and you may be able to send comments or questions via email using the email address of webcast@valleyair.org. We'll have that on the presentation slides in the beginning and at the end of our presentation. And we will go through and respond to any questions received electronically if we do receive any. So that concludes my portion of the workshop. We'll go ahead and if you can put the presentation on, Brian, and I'll pass it on to Jesse to begin the presentation process.
All right, thank you, Errol. Good evening. As Errol mentioned, I'm Jesse Garcia, Senior Air Quality Engineer in the Permit Service Department. In today's workshop, we'll be presenting the proposed amendments for Rule 2201 and 2301. And I'll be providing the first part of today's presentation for the workshop on 2201. And then I'll hand it over to Brian to present on the federal offset equivalency tracking system, as well as the amendments to Rule 2301. And then additionally, you'll see here at the bottom of the screen, the email address, which will be accepting any questions or comments during the meeting. So first, I'd like to start off with a little background on how we got to where we are today and what has already been accomplished. Going back to January of 2019, the CARB board, the California Air Resources Board, directed their staff to review the district's ERC program, the Emission Reduction Credit Program. During the review process, the district worked with CARB staff to aid in the understanding of the district's ERC system and the permitting program and provide the requested information. And then in June of 2020, CARB released its final report of the review of the district emission reduction credit system. And during CARB's review, and since then, the district has been working to address offset equivalency issues with the public advisory work group that was formed. In April of 2022, the district kicked off the rule amendment process with the public scoping meeting, and then the first public workshop to present and discuss some proposed rule language amendments was held in June of 22. And then additionally, in July of this year, EPA proposed a limited disapproval of the 2019 version of Rule 2201, which we'll discuss a little more later in this presentation. In today's presentation of the principal amendments proposed for 2201, we'll be covering the background of New Source Review, or NSR, EPA's comments on the district's 2019 version of Rule 2201, and the multi-path approach, which consists of adopting the federal offsetting requirements for NOx and VOC while maintaining a federal offset equivalency system for PM10, PM2.5, SOx, and CO. And to give some background on New Source Review, the district implements a permitting program that is designed under state law to ensure on a regional basis there is no net increase in emissions for new or modified sources. And what that means is that as we see new facilities come into the valley or modifications of existing ones, we are ensuring that we are not impeding our progress towards attaining the health-based standards. The main permitting rule that we have that meets those objectives is our new and modified stationary source review, or NSR rule, which is Rule 2201. It is designed to meet both federal and state NSR requirements, and is subject to the most rigorous NSR requirements due to the district's attainment status. And some of the key elements of 2201 include the requirement that most new and modified sources install BACT, which is the best available control technology. Emissions be offset when facility emissions are above certain thresholds. And it is important to clarify here that despite a common misconception, ERCs cannot be used in lieu of meeting other air pollution control requirements, such as through market-based systems that other agencies may have in place. Instead, ERCs are required in addition to, and only after all applicable limits and controls are required. And a little more context to ERCs, both federal and state law mandate NSR permitting programs that contain offsetting and ERC banking provisions. ERCs are intended by both federal and state law to be one part of a comprehensive NSR permitting program that has been specifically designed by Congress and the state legislature to allow for industrial growth while tightly regulating any emission increases. And we have historically operated a federal offset equivalency system since some of the requirements for state offsetting are different than federal offsetting requirements. And so we have a program that demonstrated that we have historically been able to satisfy federal offsetting through an equivalent system. And the last key element I want to point out for 2201 is the public notification requirements, which is a period prior to ATC issuance to garner comments on projects that result in emissions above specified levels. And so now I'd like to move on to discuss EPA's recent action on the 2019 version of 2201, EPA's comments, and how the district will be addressing those comments. And to give some context here, in August of 2019, the district adopted revisions to Rule 2201 to address minor approvability issues related to the 2016 revisions. These namely were performing an enhanced PM2.5 precursor demonstration for ammonia using new EPA guidance that was published after the rule was adopted in 2016, and amending definitions related to routine replacement emissions unit and temporary replacement emissions unit. And then in November of 2019, the amended Rule 2201 was submitted to EPA. And then in July of this year, EPA proposed a limited approval, limited disapproval of the 2019 version of Rule 2201. And EPA's action identified additional approvability areas which must be addressed during the current Rule 2201 amendment process, which include inclusion of certain federal NSR definitions, inclusion of federal visibility requirements, an analysis of minor source NOx and VOC public notice thresholds, removal of interpollutant offset trading for ozone precursors, revisions to definitions of routine replacement emissions unit and temporary replacement emissions unit, stack height provisions, federal offset equivalency demonstration, and other minor administrative issues. The comments provided by EPA resulted in the actions described in this slide. The district is proposing various definitions to be revised or added into section 3, which is the definition section of the rule. And I guess at this time, I'd like to add that there is an attachment that was posted to our website that includes proposed language for consideration, and some of the definitions proposed include in revisions to federal major modification, major source, and PM10, and then new definitions included in the rule for VOC, secondary emissions, and others. As well in that attachment, you'll see we have section numbers referenced throughout the presentation, and those are included in that attachment as well. So you can refer to that attachment that was posted on our website. And then instead of relying on the requirements of a federal implementation plan, the district is proposing to include as part of 2201 amendments, the district is proposing to include as part of the 2201 amendments the provisions from the Code of Federal Regulations in section 4.16 of the rule to clearly identify these as requirements for permit issuance. And consistent with a court ruling in the Sierra Club versus EPA, interpollutant offset trading is no longer allowed for ozone precursors for new major sources and federal major modification projects. Those ozone precursors would be NOx and VOC. And these provisions are proposed in section 4.14.3. The district is proposing to include in section 4.15 the stack height procedures, provisions, and definitions from the Code of Federal Regulations. And the district is also proposing amendments to the federal offset equivalency concepts, which will be discussed in further detail later in this presentation. And lastly here, the district is currently analyzing the minor source public noticing thresholds for NOx and VOC and the definitions of routine replacement emissions unit and temporary replacement emissions unit. And these proposed rule concepts will be presented at a future workshop. And I guess at this point, we'll open it up to see if there's any questions on the information we provided or presented thus far.
Our first question is from Amy. Amy, did you have a question?
And a reminder, there's going to be additional opportunities for comments or questions. So if you do have one that pops up as Jesse and Brian present, please make yourself known. And again, at the end of the presentation, we will go through a formal comment portion of the presentation.
All right, so next we'll go ahead and move on to a topic that we've discussed before, a multi-path approach for offsetting requirements. So since the district has been reclassified to extreme non-attainment for ozone, programmatically, federal NSR offsetting requirements are at least as stringent as the District Rule 2201 offsetting requirements. Therefore, for new major sources and federal major modifications for NOx and VOC, the district is proposing to integrate the federal offsetting requirements into section 4.8 of the rule. In the proposed section 4.8.4, the district will require the federal offset quantity for these types of projects, and the federal offset quantity must be satisfied with ERCs that are surplus at time of use. Consistent with the Clean Air Act, the district is proposing an exemption from the federal offset quantity for rule compliance projects that meet certain criteria. Additionally, in sections 4.8.1 and 4.8.3, the district is proposing amendments or is proposing administrative requirements such as the timing of when offsets shall be provided and the provisions to use internal emission reductions. Because of these new requirements proposed to be added to the rule, new major source and federal major modification projects for NOx and VOC no longer need to be tracked and included in the offset equivalency system, since the district is proposing to implement the federal offsetting requirements directly. And once again, for the proposed rule language, you can refer to the attachment. For ATC projects that are not new major sources or federal major modifications for NOx and VOC emissions, there are no proposed changes to the requirements of the current rule. We are proposing to require in section 4.7 the district offset quantity, or DOQ. This term DOQ, or district offset quantity, has been used in discussions in the past, but is being proposed to officially be included in the rule. As we previously mentioned, that the federal offset requirements are programmatically more stringent than the DOQ. Therefore, new major source and federal major modifications for NOx and VOC are exempt from the district offset quantity requirements. The district offset quantity may be continued to be satisfied with ERCs that are valued at time of banking or issuance, and this is consistent with state law and historic California Air District practice. The other part of the multi-path approach for PM10, PM2.5, SOX, and CO is a little more straightforward in that it follows the district's current offsetting procedures, and the district will continue to maintain a system to demonstrate equivalency with the federal offsetting requirements. For all ATC projects, the district would require the DOQ, the district offset quantity, and the DOQ may be satisfied with any valid ERC. Once again, this is consistent with state law and historic California Air District practice. This path for these pollutants is still appropriate because programmatically, Rule 2201 offsetting requirements are more stringent than federal NSR offsetting requirements. And as such, the district will continue to track and include these pollutants in federal offset equivalency system to ensure that our requirements are at least as stringent as the federal program. And therefore, the offsetting requirements for these pollutants are not expected to change. And then once again, you can see the proposed language in the attachment that was posted to our website. And with that, we'll go ahead and pass it over to Brian.
Hello, my name is Brian Clerico. I'm a supervising air quality engineer here in Permit Services. And I'll treat the next part of the presentation here. I'm going to cover the some proposed concepts for federal offset equivalency tracking, and then as well as the proposed amendments to District Rule 2301, the ERC banking rule. So I want to emphasize here in this part of the presentation on the federal offset equivalency tracking system. These are concepts we are still deliberating on. Currently, these requirements are contained in section 7.0 of the rule. So if you want to look and see what the rule language, current rule language there is, but we don't have any new rule language to present here or in the attachment that Jesse's referred to, linked on our website. But we expect by the next workshop to have some a fully developed approach and rule language for your review and comment. Also, these slides there, I won't be going over in any real detail about how federal offset equivalency works, but I certainly would take any questions you have on that. But I would also, if you're maybe new to our rule development process here for 2201, or haven't maybe been involved in the public advisory work group or following along with that, I would point you to many fine resources we have, recorded and written, that do a very nice job of explaining federal offset equivalency. But don't let that stop you from asking any questions you'd like to ask here. So as a result of the CAR program review and intensive follow-up by district staff, the district determined it is no longer meets federal offset equivalency for NOx and VOC, and is unlikely to show such equivalency in the future. Therefore, as Jesse described in his slides, the district is adopting the federal NSR offsetting requirements for NOx and VOC for projects that are new major sources or federal major modifications for NOx or VOC. However, the district will continue to maintain the federal offset equivalency demonstration and tracking system for the other pollutants for PM10, PM2.5, SOx, and CO. As a side note here, it's worth noting maybe in the past 7 or 8 years, the district has only had one project that was a new major source or federal major modification for any of these pollutants. So it's not as common. Prior to that, they've been slightly more frequent, but again, these are not these are not like NOx and VOC where we had potentially dozens of those every year. So as I said, we're planning to maintain the equivalency system for PM10, PM2.5, SOx, and CO, but we have proposed, and this was discussed in the last workshop, to go from a 2-test approach for equivalency to a single test demonstration. And you might remember that in the current demonstration, there are 2 tests for equivalency. Test 1, we call it the offset quantity test, and test 2 is called we refer to it as the surplus value test. Test 1 is really not a standalone test for equivalency. Test 2, I think, is more comprehensive in that way. So what we're proposing here is to really adopt a single test that more resembles what test 2 is. Test 2 sort of encompasses the same aspects of test 1. So it is a more comprehensive test for equivalency. And by going to a single test, we're both ensuring that we're truly demonstrating programmatic equivalency, and we're not getting into a situation like we had with NOx, where we were, following the rule language, we had a situation of partial equivalency, and I think EPA felt, and they in their recent comments on District Rule 2201, that state of partial equivalency wasn't really a satisfactory place to be. So we're proposing this single test. Among the other amendments, of course, we're hoping to improve rule clarity and transparency for federal offset equivalency. It's a very most people find it to be a very complicated thing to understand, and we're hoping to make that less so with the amendments here. And then here, with a focus really of most of this presentation, is to discuss the district's proposed transition of the equivalency system from an annual demonstration to a system that demonstrates ongoing equivalency at the time of ATC issuance. And we're doing this significantly to address EPA comments on the Rule 2201 in July. So currently, the equivalency system relies on this annual true-up to determine equivalency. We determine equivalency once a year. The district collects the equivalency data throughout a year. It's not a calendar year, it's a tracking year. It moves from August to August of the following year. But at the end of the year, we crunch the numbers and we determine, was Rule 2201 offset system, was it, equally stringent as would have been required under federal NSR? And then we issue the report on this, accounting that we do within 3 months of the end of the equivalency tracking year. Thus, there's a lag between potentially when there's an inability to demonstrate equivalency and the end of year true up that we do, and then likewise the remedies that follow from that if there is a shortfall. So during this time, it's possible that other projects that might be new major sources or federal major modifications may, receive approval when the district does not have sufficient surplus at time of use credits to make up the difference between what the district's offsetting system and the federal offset system. So EPA's concern here is that the district could operate an equivalency system at a deficit during the year. And so this was their concern and comment in their July comments on our rule. So in place of this annual demonstration, we are proposing or considering, I guess at this point, a time of ATC issuance demonstration for each ATC project that is a new major source or federal major modification for PM10, PM2.5, SOX, or CO. We believe this would solve the problem EPA had noted, or a concern EPA had noted, that a time of issuance demonstration in this way would not allow the program to operate at a deficit compared to the federal offset requirements. So we would have sort of a real-time or always present up-to-date equivalency. So in this proposed time of ATC issuance equivalency, what would be the same as our current system? Well, the district would still make up any project shortfalls using extra credible emission reductions from the tracking system carried over from prior years or brought into the system during the current tracking year. So that will be the same. The district will make up the difference. What would be different is each ATC project that is a new major source or major modification, again, just for the pollutants we're talking about, PM, SOX, CO, each ATC project for those that is a new major source or federal major modification would have to demonstrate equivalency before the district could proceed with a preliminary decision to approve the ATC. So it would be contained in that project in a sense. The demonstration of federal offset equivalency would be also included as part of the ATC application review that is a new major source or federal major modification. And these are already subject to EPA, CARB, and public review. And one of the other advantages to this, I think in terms of, both the public, but especially the oversight agencies, is I think it's much more reviewable by them. The end of the year demonstrations where there's, potentially, well, at least in the past, or many projects, it was a daunting, not to say overwhelming task to attempt to review that. So this is much more manageable. So for the time of use equivalency demonstration, what does that procedure look like? Well, we calculate a federal offset quantity for every project that is a new major source or federal major modification. Then in that project, this is not, you know, the source is not, or the applicant is not liable for that federal offset quantity. They're only providing ERCs for the district offset quantity. Now, any ERCs they provide, we would count against that federal offset quantity to the extent those ERCs still have surplus at time of use value. This is a little different from the current system where they go into a sort of a general the tracking system, and they're not necessarily married to that project, but here in this system, they would stay married to the project. Then the district, as we said, would make up any shortfall or difference there needed to show federal offset equivalency from the available carryover balance in the tracking system. And the district then would also include the appropriate creditability demonstrations within the ATC project evaluation. So everyone could check our work. So what are the options if a project cannot demonstrate equivalency as it's proposed? Well, so the district would not be able to issue the authority to construct permit. And in fact, the idea is if we obviously noted during our evaluation, then we wouldn't even go to a preliminary decision to approve the authority to construct permit. So the options for the applicant at this point would be they could revise their project proposal. They could either include perhaps find ERCs that have more surplus at time of use value to cover the deficit. They could lower or eliminate their potential emissions and the federal offset quantity obligation by lowering their potential to emit, say. Or, I mean, they could wait for the district to accumulate sufficient creditable emission reductions in the tracking system to mitigate the federal offset quantity. Of course, there's no guarantee, when that would happen. So they might be, it might take an amount of time, but these are sort of roughly the general options for a situation where we can't show federal offset equivalency for the project. So maybe we can pause here and see if there are any questions or comments.
No questions so far, which is all right. There's still opportunities.
I'm afraid I've lost everyone. So, okay, well, we'll continue on here. And I'm going to talk about some the proposed amendments to Rule 2301. That's the emission reduction credit banking rule. In the previous workshop, we introduced some concepts and had proposed some draft rule language for 2301. And here is an outline of the principal amendments to Rule 2301 we were proposing. The main reason for even looking at 2301 is to address the ERC application timeliness issue, and specifically ERC application timeliness from shutdowns. This issue had been noted in the CARB report. But in addition to addressing this issue, we'd also introduced the idea of perhaps no longer banking new greenhouse gas credits, adding maybe some definitions and other requirements to the rule, though, to outline how perhaps we could use other types of creditable emission reductions as we look for other sources of emission reductions to use or to make available for sources. And then also just a general sort of a top-down thorough analysis of the rule to make sure the rule language is internally consistent and clear. So as for ERC application timeliness, we had discussed this in the last workshop extensively, and the district proposed to amend the definition of shutdown consistent with longstanding district policy APR 1805, which was adopted in 1992 to address concerns over the internal logic and incentives created by the current definition. We went into, as I said, considerable depth during the last workshop over this issue, which I won't repeat here. Of course, you're free to ask any question you like about this, but what I'll simply note here is some of the minor changes that we proposed from the last workshop. So the updates, there was a minor change to the shutdown definition. So we included maintenance activities among the list of items that show evidence of intent to operate again. And then we elaborated on the language for requiring how we describe, when the date of emission reduction is for ATC projects. These changes are just really refinements. They're not really changes in our approach or otherwise significantly different from what we had proposed in the last workshop, but they're noted and they are included in the attachment that's linked on our website. So for greenhouse gas banking, in the last workshop, we did mention we were considering whether or not we needed to continue to bank new greenhouse gas emission reductions in light of their very minimal historical use and the existence of many alternative mature greenhouse gas banking programs. And so to that end, we proposed to remove the provisions in Rule 2301 this time around of new greenhouse gas banking, and those sections are referenced here and also likewise in the attachment. But we are also noting that we would be retaining provisions for all other greenhouse gas related banking transactions. So, whatever has been banked up to this point would remain in the bank. So, and then we also talked about in the last workshop we were proposing to review the administrative mechanisms, definitions, and procedures for the banking and use of other creditable emission reductions. And some examples of those are what we're calling unbanked shutdown emission reductions, going by the acronym users here. Those would be sort of akin to orphan shutdowns. We're using a different name here kind of to distinguish them between the previous, perhaps not defined way we used to bank orphan shutdowns. But those things also include things like air quality improvement deduction and mobile source credits. Those are other potential sources of creditable emission reductions. So the updates to this are that we did propose a definition for unbanked shutdown emission reductions. And the idea there was to ensure that they match ERCs in quality. And yes, that was the concern about orphan shutdowns previously, that there was some concern about the way they were quantified and them their quality not being up to par with ERCs. And then we've also continued to study recent mobile source ERC banking by other air districts, and specifically Maricopa in Arizona has been something we've been paying attention to. So we're hoping to learn from that, and it may not be part of this current rulemaking, but that's, we're still, as I said, we're still looking at that. And then some other minor amendments to 2301 that we've included in the attachment to the workshop here. Adding AER as an abbreviation for actual emission reductions, including AER in the definition of offset to match Rule 2201. So we're trying to make the definitions from 2301 and 2201 consistent with each other here. We added some language clarifying prohibited emission reductions from power plants. We've added provisions, or I should say we've clarified a provision ensuring the enforceability of ERCs based on non-permitted sources. There appear to be some grammatical issues with that section of the rule. And then finally, we added a clarifying sentence here when surplusing of ERCs may be performed. We wanted that likewise to be consistent with the practice in 2201 that we're having to make surplus at time of use adjustments for new major sources and federal major modifications for NOx and VOC. So the next steps here we have for our rulemaking are we're definitely going to have at least one more workshop, either in late December or January. We expect to publish a proposed draft rule by the first quarter of 2023, and having a governing board public hearing in either the first or second quarter of 2023. But certainly presently we're encouraging public participation and comment, which is invited here throughout the process.
Thanks, Brian. So the lead and our contact person for the amendments to rules 2201 and 2301 will be Jesse Garcia. Here is his contact information. So please, if you have any comments or questions, submit them to Jesse at the email address, jessegarcia@valleyair.org, or if you so are inclined to provide written hard copy comments, you can mail them to the district office at 1990 East Gettysburg, Fresno 93726. The one thing that I will ask of is, as Brian had identified in the prior slide, we are looking to hold another public workshop, at least another public workshop sometime in the late fourth quarter or early first quarter of 2023. And so what I will ask is if you do have any comments on what we have presented this evening in regards to the workshop slides or the attachment that we have on the district's website, if you can provide those comments within the next couple of weeks by Friday, November 11th. That way we can ensure that we include and consider any of those comments prior to the next upcoming workshop. So again, I apologize for it not being on this actual slide, but if you can submit comments to the district for consideration if there is some rule inconsistencies or you find rule language to be not clear, well, we would appreciate to have those comments submitted to us by Friday, November 11th. So that concludes our formal portion of the presentation. We will now move on to the comments and questions portion. Again, we have those who are in attendance via the Zoom application. We might even have some via teleconference, and we also have the ability to receive comments via webcast at valleyair.org, which I have on my laptop and have been monitoring this entire presentation. So we'll go ahead and start with those who are in attendance via Zoom. Do we have any comments? Okay, so no comments via Zoom. Any comments from the potential attendees via teleconference? No one's pressing the *9 to raise their hand. Okay, and I still don't see any comments via webcast at valleyair.org. So without seeing any comments at this point, I think that will conclude our workshop presentation tonight. Again, I really appreciate all of those who have decided to join us to hear about the district's proposed amendments to District Rules 2301, our ERC banking rule, and District Rule 2201, our new and modified stationary source review rule. If you do, again, have any comments or questions, please submit those to us within the next 2 weeks by November 11th. But throughout this process, myself, Brian, and Jesse are available to field any comments or questions. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you.